Hi, I'm Jo Clark, and thanks so much for joining me today. This is the Redefining Midlife podcast, a podcast designed for the 40-plus woman who is determined to challenge society's myths and beliefs around midlife. It's for the woman who is inspired and ready to define midlife her way. Join me each week as I chat to health and wellness experts for up-to-date information on how to live well, as well as some special conversations with incredible everyday women redefining what midlife can look like. Here's to making our next half of life even better than the first. Before we get into today's episode, I'd love to thank listeners who have taken the time to share or recommend this podcast with someone, as well as those who have rated and reviewed the podcast. And a great big thanks to listener Nikki Life's Good, who left such a special review. She wrote, "I look forward to listening to each episode when it is released. So nice to have a podcast specifically about midlife from a positive aspect. Each episode I take away an inspirational piece of information which makes me look at life differently in a good way. Thanks so much to Jo Clark. You are an inspiration. I look forward now to entering this phase of life." Well, thanks so much, Nikki, for leaving such beautiful, kind and special words. You know, just taking a minute or two to share, rate and review makes such a difference, and it helps to get the podcast out to other women. And like Nikki, it might be just what they need to hear. Now, on to today's very special guest. I'm thrilled and so proud to introduce you to Letetia Berthelson, one of the bravest and most resilient women I've had the pleasure to call my friend. Now, Letetia is a wife and a mother to 3 adult sons and has just welcomed a beautiful daughter-in-law to the family fold. Along with her husband, Mark, of 29 years, they own and operate a cattle grazing entity in the Mundubra-Gayndah region of Queensland. Now, just over 10 years ago, Letetia's husband, Mark, suffered a catastrophic brain injury in a terrible, terrible accident while riding a horse. Letetia shares that incredibly difficult time with us and how it impacted the entire family. Thankfully, Mark has recovered from that accident. Now we're going to fast track through a number of years of normality in the episode. And the 3 boys had finished boarding school, her eldest son had just married, and life was going along well for Letetia and Mark. And then came the shocking diagnosis that changed Letetia's world in the absolute blink of an eye. In April 2021, Letetia was diagnosed with triple negative tumor, that is breast cancer stage 3. The story Letetia shares today is one that might just help other women, and you can follow Letetia's journey on Instagram at @MyBreastCancerMyWay, and the direct links you can find in the show notes. Now, without further ado, I'm so proud to introduce you to my friend, the fabulous Letetia Berthelson. Welcome, Letetia, to the Redefining Midlife podcast. And as we are friends, it's going to be, at times, it's going to be probably a little bit more personal, that we can say things to each other that I may not ask or a guest may not respond in a certain way. So I really thank you for this time that you're going to be giving us today. And we're going to be sharing some really personal things. So I also thank you in advance for your bravery. And I know how honest a woman that you are. So you're going to say it as it is, and we're going to strap ourselves in and have you take us on this journey.
Thanks, Jo. It's a really great opportunity, I think, to sort of share probably the last 10, 15 years of my life, and if it can help someone understand what I've gone through, may help them in some way, that's the positive out of this, I think. Yeah, I'm not very good at selling myself, but yes, it'll be very raw and straight to the point. It is what it is, and that's just life.
Thank you. Thank you again for your bravery.
Thank you.
So you and I met through the friendship of our sons, our boys who were away at boarding school together. And I've only come to know you as the amazing woman that you are over the last probably less than 10 years. And I've only heard a few stories of the past and your past life. And I'm busting to find out what younger Letetia was like in her earlier years. And because we know what our formative years are like as we are late teenagers and into our early adult years, and they often shape the people that we are now. So what was that time of life like for you?
Well, my younger years were just living life to the fullest and not really having too much of a plan in front of me. And like I thoroughly enjoyed my younger years, just having a good time with my friends and working. I didn't have any aspiration of going off to university. I think looking back, I always wanted to sort of maybe meet the right man, settle down and have children and just work and be involved in your community. So with that, I had a couple of heartaches and heartbreaks and swore off men altogether. And then took myself on a P&O cruise and had the best time. So when I got back off the P&O cruise, they had lost my luggage. My flatmate had moved out, and another flatmate had moved in. And unbeknownst to me, that flatmate that moved in had broken up with a friend of mine. And while I was on the cruise, she had met a man from Mundubbera. So she called in and said, "What are you doing on the weekend?" I said, "Well, not much. They've lost my luggage, so I can't really do much." And she said to me, "Well, how about you get in the car with me and come to Taroom Camp Draft?" I thought, oh, well, I've never been to a camp draft, so off I toddled. Well, I was the only woman there in a pair of shorts, and thank God they were denim shorts, because honestly, I was really out of my comfort zone. I had no idea what they were doing at a camp draft. So for those that don't know, it is one of Australia's biggest horse sports, and they chase a beast in the yard. Then they've got to do a figure eight outside the yard around pegs and put it through a gate. And unbeknownst to me, that's where I met Mark. He eyed me off from a distance. I had no aspirations of meeting a man, so I promptly sat myself down at the bar at 10 o'clock and proceeded to have a bit of fun. And then that night was the 20th of March, 31 years ago, I think now. And I remember having a slow dance with Mark, and then we went back to where our swags were. Never slept in a swag. And my girlfriend decided, see you later. I'm going to go and check out my new man from Mundubbera, and left me standing there with this swag rolled up and Mark standing beside me. So we sat around talking for a very, very long time until the sun come up, and the rest is history. So
he must have been fairly smooth back then, hey? Oh, not that he's not smooth now. Sorry, Mark. I'm sure.
Yes, and then from there on, back in those days, it was telephone calls.
Yeah.
No mobile phones. So we used to phone each other, and then my friend and I used to travel to Mundubbera on weekends. And
so how far was that for you? Was that?
From Billawilla to Mundubbera is about 2.5 hours. And we'd meet at the local pub in town. Mark had come in from town, pick me up, and then drop me off on a Sunday. And then my friend got into university, and then I just travelled down by myself. Tried to learn as much as I could about grazing life on the farm, living on a farm, and so that's how that all started. So backwards and forwards, a bit of a long distance relationship, I suppose you would say. And we did that for about 3 years before he popped the big question. And the rest is history.
Oh, that's so. And in that time, you've raised 3 boys.
Yeah, we have 3 beautiful sons. It is the biggest achievement of my life. I get very emotional when I talk about my family and my boys, because they are my world. I probably would fall on a sword for them. If I had to give up a kidney all my life, I would hands down do that for them. And they're my rock, they're my everything. So, yeah.
Oh, that's really special. So, Letetia, you were from a small country town, and you've moved to a more remote location to be with Mark. Was that a hard transition for you? Because sometimes it's harder if you've got absolutely no idea, but sometimes being in a country town, you've got a bit of an inkling of what it could be like.
I suppose it was a little bit difficult because we never lived together before we got married. So we had our long distance relationship just travelling backwards and forwards. And then we got married, and then I went from Biloela to Mundubbera. So Mundubbera was probably slightly smaller in size to Biloela. So I finished work and, became a wife. And I think the hardest thing was trying to go from having an income, not having an income, that financial security, and having your friends and the comfort of your network in Biloela to having just you and Mark sort of thing. So that was a big adjustment. But once I found work, you just then start meeting people. And, I sort of always knew we weren't going to be moving a lot because Mark is a very homely boy, always has been. He was born and raised in Mundubbera. His family had settled to their grazing block in 1916, so it'd been in the family for a while. So we, between going from a job that I had that I was like 2IC at the motel and running the motel side of it, and to just nothing and learning how to read cattle or understand, when someone yells gate, you got to run and shut a gate, or, trying to learn the back end to the front end of a beast. I did know how to ride, but I was not a very confident horse person. So I can work in the yards now. I prefer the dust over riding a horse, let's just say. I like to be in control. And when they've got a mind of their own, I'd much rather walk 5K home.
So that sounds like you'd never got into the camp drafting yourself then.
No, I was the social butterfly. Like I feed off other people's. And
of course you do.
Yeah, I'm the social butterfly. So I thoroughly enjoyed that side of the camp drafting world.
Yeah. So many of our listeners live in the city or larger towns, and you've raised your 3 boys on the land. So it's a really foreign concept, raising children in the city as compared to on the land. What do you love about raising children in a country setting?
I think it's all the freedom that they have as children, like to grow up, and the exposure to life skills at a very early age, and the cycle of life sort of thing. They learn that sort of skills very early on, and I think that freedom has really developed them into the wonderful young men that they are. Mark and I always have a open concept too. We always had conversations around anything and everything, and we never excluded the boys from earshot of those conversations either. Around the business, like Mark and I were very strong believers that of a night time we would sit down and always have that family meal together. And have your conversations of, what happened during the day, or And
so it's very much like us.
Yeah, it's just the freedom that they get to roam. Like children that live in town don't have the freedom to be able to be, one brother on the steering wheel and the other brother doing the gear stick change on the vehicle and the other one's on the pedals, or or taking the car down the paddock to do donuts, or or with their father, I might add too. And it's always
under adult supervision, no doubt. Yes.
Yeah. I could imagine Mark would have been right in there with them, teaching them all their bad habits. They did not get their bad habits from their mother.
Of course they did. Not one.
No.
It's that absolute freedom, isn't it, at a younger age, where they've got the space to explore, the space to play. And like you said earlier, just that whole life and death. Like my kid, we grew up, my children grew up in their formative years on a remote property, far southwest Queensland. So a lot of that was gripped in the, some hideous drought times. So it was feeding. It's really learning the responsibilities that you have when you're on the land as well. Like when it is a dry time, you're out there and you're spending hours. I mean, my kids grew up in the back of a trailer, cottonseed trailer, feeding cottonseed for a good couple of years, and checking the waters and pulling beasts and sheep out of the bogged water holes and things. So it's huge when you compare that to the experiences of city boys and girls. I had a boy and a girl, but city children. There's definitely pros and cons.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the remoteness is that the flip side of it, I suppose, is that social interaction with, the bigger city and the opportunities that, come with living in a bigger city, like, maybe going to a concert or going to the cricket or those sort of things. Sports-wise, they're very limited out here to what activities they could do. Yeah. And when you're living on the land and that's your business, your weekends are not getting in the boat or going fishing or water skiing or anything like those sort of activities. It's always work. And, so you've got to enjoy those small moments, and they may be just around dinner, but and trying to get off the land to go away for a holiday was always very, hard back in the, you would know, Joe, like, just trying to get away when it was dry, that's just a no-go,
Yeah.
Because you're always worried about, water runs, feed runs. Yeah.
When I think about our kids, Letetia, it's I don't think their growing up has impacted their social life. I think they soon learned.
No, I think boarding school opened them up to a whole new world, didn't it?
It certainly did. It certainly did. Yes. And they certainly, and that's a lovely thing that they've remained long, friends.
Yeah, that's right. And
that time too.
Even for us, like as boarding school parents too, like we've developed friendships throughout all three boys that are still strong today.
Yeah, that's really special. That is very much the special part of the boarding school situation too. So, we've both experienced firsthand lots of those positive things that happen when you live a life on the land, but it's not always rosy, and we've discussed some of those things. But you and your family went through a really, really incredibly difficult time back in 2012 when your husband, Mark, had a very serious accident. Can you share with us what happened then?
Yeah. So back then, Mark and I were in partnership with his brother and my sister-in-law in an orchard. We also had our grazing business. We also ran a Charolais stud on the side, not on the side, as part of our business as well. Mark also looked after his parents' grazing entity as well. So he was a very busy man, driving a truck from the orchard to the packing shed. So just a bit of a backstory into his accident. So we also had country in Chinchilla. So we used to send our bats over to Chinchilla to grow out. So he was over there mustering with his father, and they'd just finished mustering. His father took the load down to the feedlot, and Mark was putting the cattle away back into the other paddock. So we had two paddocks that was divided by a road, which was only used by our neighbour at the end twice a day, once in the morning and once of an afternoon, picking kids up off the school bus about 500 metres away. And our two gates were boarded, his front gate or back gate, I suppose. So this one day, I just phoned Mark to say, how you going? How you travelling? What time can I expect you home? And he said, I'm just pushing them back over. I'm just at the gate now and I shouldn't be too much longer. And then next minute I hear him yelling at the dogs, get over. And he's whistling at the dogs at the gate. And I said, well, it sounds like you're a bit busy there. I'll let you go. So what had happened was the cattle had blown out on him and started going up the road. So he then had to jump. Well, what we think has happened, because he doesn't have any memory of it, is that he's jumped on his horse, he's got in front of them and turned them back around. But as he was coming back down that road, Chinchilla is known for its melon hull country. And we tend to think that his horse has had a tumble in one of the melon holes and had actually rolled on his head. And no one, he's very lucky to be alive, because that particular day the neighbour was going up the road to pick the children up, and he saw Mark's dog just at the corner of his eye, and he said, "Oh, Mark must be mustering over here," and thought, "What is that dog licking?" Or, had its head down. The dog was actually licking Mark's face because he had vomited, and if he hadn't seen him, wouldn't have seen him in the grass, would have driven straight past him. Wow. If he hadn't seen the dog, Mark would have died then and there, because he would have choked on his own vomit or aspirated. And, so from there, they got the ambulance to him, and then I was working in the packing shed of our orchard at the time, and it was about 5:30 of an afternoon. Mary, my sister-in-law, come running over to say, "Mark's had a horse accident. They're getting the ambulance to him. They're taking him to Toowoomba." Lane was at home at the time. The two boys, Luke and Adam, were at boarding school. So Luke must have been year 10, Adam was year 8, and Lane was at home. So I had actually dropped Lane at home, went back to the shed to pack the truck for it to go with a load of fruit. And I've just said to Mary, because she come running over to me to say Mark's had his accident, and they're taking him to Toowoomba. So Mark's a very competent horse rider, and I just thought, oh, yeah, righto. He's had one really bad horse accident before where he sort of busted his pelvis once before, and I thought, oh, yeah, Mark's tough. He's right. I'll just jump in the car and I'll take off to Chinchilla. So, and I did ask Mary to go and get Lane and, look after him. So by the time I got to Chinchilla, I walked into the emergency room and I was just literally slapped in the face. And from that moment walking in, our world started to spiral out of control. And I'm a very controlled person. I need things in place. I have lists. I do things like this. And when something like this happens in your life and you can't control it, it is very hard to fathom what was going on, because when I walked in, Mark's head was actually swollen and he had big black eyelids, like purple. I knew he was all right spinal wise, because he kept coming in and out of consciousness saying, I need to go to the toilet, I need to go to the toilet. I had his father and his sister in the room as well, and the nurse was trying to keep him still. Anyway, I ended up rousing on him and said, you can't go to the toilet, I need you to keep still. So at that point I knew things weren't too bad. But when I got there, they said, we're not taking him to Toowoomba, he's going straight to Brisbane, we're airlifting him out. I went, okay, righto. And the whole 2 hours of driving to Chinchilla, I was in and out of service, so I tried to get onto my mother and she wouldn't answer the phone. Come on, Mum, because I have a very close relationship with my mother. And she always grounds me, and I needed this grounding. And I remember pulling up at Dark Creek, which is a little service station, to go to the toilet, wash my face, have a chuck, because, just your thought process. And when you had no service and you couldn't talk to anyone, I couldn't even phone each other all the time and just vet the day's activities or whatever. Could not do that. And I kept phoning Mum, no answer. And then my stepfather eventually answered the phone and he said to me, I said, oh, Mum home? And he said, yeah, she's just walked in and had, bone graft on her jaw, remember? She just had surgery. And I've gone, oh, shit, that's right. Oh, okay. He said, what's wrong? And I said, well, is she able to talk? And he said, oh, no, not really, love. Well, okay. You don't mind putting her on, though. Can I just have, he's going, what is the matter? And I just said, Mark's had a horse accident and it's not good and they're taking him to Brisbane. Well, she soon learned how to talk with the bone graft on the jaw. And I said, I don't know much else than that. And I said, I've got to get myself to Brisbane because I wasn't allowed on the flight. We learnt later the reason why I wasn't allowed on the flight was because they didn't think he would even make the flight, survive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So once they got him in the air, I thought, oh, Christ, I hate driving in Brisbane. I don't even know my way around Brisbane. And fortunate for me, I had my auntie that lived in Brisbane, and we're quite close as well. So I phoned her, and she is an ICU nurse trained. And I said to Davida, hey, just wondering if you can help me out. I'm just going to come into Brisbane, be there in a couple of hours. I said, Mark's had a major horse accident. I said, David, his head is swollen and he has the biggest, purplest eyes. I've never seen anything like that. And she said to me, are you sitting down, Bubba? Because she calls me Bubba. And I said, no. She said, I need you to sit down. And I sat down on the hospital steps at the front of Chinchilla there, and she said, he has sustained a major head injury. He has fractured his head. And what happens is the blood pours into the eyelids, and that is what we call raccoon eyes. She said, you're going to be down here for a long time, not just weeks, honey. You're going to be down here for months. I've gone. I said, well, can I meet you at the hospital? And she said, we'll meet you in Toowoomba. So I had to, the hardest thing was to tell the boys.
Yes.
And at the time I had got on to the housemaster and I said, I need Luke to have his phone on him. I told him what had happened and I said, I need to call in and see the boys before I go on to Brisbane. And I said, it's going to be midnight when I get there. And he was fine. The school was great. So I called in, saw the boys, gave him a briefing, and then jumped in the car with Davida and we went into the PA. So going into the hospital, I was met with a nurse and a doctor, and they sat down and they said that he has sustained a head injury. They've put a probe into his head to monitor the swelling, and he said the next 48 hours are critical. If we can get Mark to survive that, we've got some chance of him returning home. I just remember thinking, and we were in a small room. I don't understand why they're going to put you in a small room because the walls just felt like they were crushing my chest. And the male nurse at the time said to me, Mrs. Berthelsen, are you okay? Because I must have went white. And I said, no, I'm not. And I said, I need a toilet. And he took me to the toilet. And as I'm walking up the corridor, I sort of lost balance and he caught me. And then I went to the toilet. I had a bit of a cry. I washed my face. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror and going, Jesus, love, take a teaspoon of cement. You've got to toughen up here. So I sucked it up, went back, and they were moving into the ICU. And then we got up there a couple of hours later, and Davida was on the phone to Mum, early hours. And I remember walking past Dee to go to the toilet, and I overheard her saying to Mum, I've seen the scans. It's not good. You need to get here because he's not going to pull through this, and Letetia's going to need to. And, yeah, I just collapsed in the toilet again and, yeah, had a little mini moment and then came out. And Mark was in an induced coma for 3 weeks. The hardest thing I had to do was, I remember sitting there with Mum saying, oh my God, Mum, how am I going to tell the boys? And fortunate for us, when something like that happens, the hospital appoints a social worker. And she sat me down and said, look, you've got 3 boys and one's going to fight, one's going to flee, and one's just going to be stunned. And exactly that happened with the boys. Yeah, Adam was the closest to his father at the time. He was stunned. Lane was probably a little bit too young to sort of really comprehend what was going on, and he was probably the one that got affected out of all of this the most. And Luke was the one that really stood up and took on the role as being, I remember having that conversation with Mum, how are we going to tell the boys? And she said, whatever you do, don't cry. Do not cry in front of the boys. So we took the boys in to see Mark for the first time, and he was hooked up to everything. And his head was swollen and those big purple eyes. And I just remember looking at all of the boys and thinking, don't cry, be strong, be the strong one here. You know, you've got to step up. And I looked over and here's my mum bawling her bloody eyes out. And I'm sitting there going, oh, how you are. Like, anyway, so we, got through that. And it was the worst time of our lives. And I had to pull Lane out of school. I phoned the Toowoomba and asked if I could get him into boarding school because I needed to have all three boys together and only just up the road in case something went pear-shaped. At least I could get the boys there. So for 3 weeks, there was pretty well nothing happening with Mark, no improvements. He had like tachycardias all the time, couldn't get his body temperature right. The neuro pathways in his head were just scattered. And they had said to me it was like shaken baby syndrome. So he had multiple bleeds from the base all the way up throughout his head, but he had one major hematoma that was on the side of the main vein that drained the blood away from your brain. And then there was a conversation about 2 weeks in that they may have to go in and remove the bruising so that the pressure could be relieved. But they said it is going to be a 50-50. So he could die on the operating table. So if we phone you, we need you to give us permission to go ahead. And I said, so you want me to give you permission to kill my husband, basically? Yeah. Mm. Thankfully, we didn't have to have any of that. But 3 weeks. So what the medical team like to do is they allow 3 days for the swelling, 3 days off swelling, and then 3 days of the swelling to go down, and then they start to back the drugs off and bring them out of coma. So the day before they were going to do that, they said we need to have a family meeting and we will back it off and then it'll be up to Mark. So if he's going to come back, it will be up to him. And I just remember walking out of that room saying, can I just go and spend some time with Mark? And I walked into his room and I stood there and I said to him, if you've got to go, you go. Well, I fully understand. But if you are going to come back to the kids and you need to step up to the batting plate and it's all in. It's our family motto. If you start something, we finish it. So if you're going to come back to us, you make sure that you're ready to fight. I said, but if you've got to go, you've got to go. And I don't know if that helped. I'd like to tend to think it did, because the very next day when I was beside his bed, the doctor came over and said, we need to have that family meeting. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't do this. Like, how do you plan your life without your significant other? And we walked into the room and sat down, and he said to me, I don't know what's happened, but overnight he has started to come back. Miracle, I think. So, yeah, and then every day after that was, his eyes would open up the next day. And then the next day his eyeballs were moving around the room. The next day he was squeezing hands, and so there was progression every day. So you just had to take a positive out of the negative every day when you walked out of that hospital, because you just got a little bit of your soul was just sucked away when you're there all day. And and then from there he went from there to the brain rehab ward, and then he was a position came available in the Princess Alexander's hospital called Buru, which is a brain injury rehab unit, which he spent probably 6 months there doing, little things like, stacking the dishwasher, chopping carrots and things like that. And I did remember thinking to myself at the time, this is child's play, like it's like a kindergarten. But looking back, they're the fundamental foundations that he had to relearn everything to be able to get to have the best outcome of recovery. Yeah, so we did that and left. That was in May, and we left in September that same year. Looking back, Mark now realises that we probably left too early, 3 months too early. But, the biggest goal was to get home. Yeah, it was awful, Jo, absolutely awful.
I can only but imagine how horrific that must have been for everyone in the family. For you as a wife to see your husband going through something like that and then thinking about what happens if he is gone. It would have been just horrendous. But thank God that didn't happen. It's made you both stronger and your family stronger as well. So that's, if there's any good in something like that happening, that is one of the incredible things.
And that's the beauty. Looking back now, it's made us a stronger couple. It's made us stronger parents. It's cemented our relationships within ourselves and our children, and that's the positive. I really don't think that if Mark had his accident, we would probably have we'd have a good relationship with our children, but I think that has really helped. Yeah, and I'm a big believer. You got to take a positive out of a negative wherever you can.
Yeah. As one of our past guests was saying, it's eating that shit sandwich and keep smiling, isn't it?
Yeah, I took a tablespoon of cement. I really had to toughen up.
Oh.
Yeah. I may have been looking very strong on the outside, but the legs were like a duck underwater legs, going 10 to the dozen.
And I'm sure there are people who are listening, Letetia, who have been in that situation themselves and would be able to identify with that as being something that they've experienced as well. And for me, who hasn't had their significant other go through something that horrific, I can only but imagine. And,
and then there was life struggles when you came home too. Like I had to then adapt into the role that Mark used to do. So we were feeding cattle at the time. I had to do all of the driving, and it was nothing to put out 500 kilos of feed for cattle, dry lick for your cattle, and you're lifting 20 kilo bags off the back of the Hilux into, you just got to do what you got to do. Yes. They're the cards that are dealt, and you just adapt, I think, to the cards that are dealt. So,
and speaking of that, Tish, we'll move on to the next one. With your younger son finished boarding school in 2018, so there's no more school anymore. There's no more those no more school fees, and that's always a time to rejoice. Or the countless hours of travelling backwards and forwards to the school events, because when you've bought a parent, you clock up hundreds and thousands of kilometres very quickly. So those of us who have gone through this stage look for that little bit more time to ourselves and what we can do for ourselves. But life had other plans for you. So you've gone through hell and back more than once over the last couple of years, and you've just told one huge, massive life story that I think for many, they would hope that would never be open, that book would never be opened again. But you had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And I know that your story that you're going to share with us is going to have an impact on anyone who listens. And without being overly dramatic, it could actually save someone's life, in that it might get them to check their breasts themselves or be really vigilant with that. So can you tell us how your cancer was detected?
Yeah, so life was going really well, Jo. Like everything was just beautiful. The boys had, finished school. They were on their own career paths. Lane had started his apprenticeship. Adam was halfway through his apprenticeship and Luke was in the territory doing his thing, and he'd met a beautiful girl and brought her home, and we were looking forward to their wedding in March. And so the backstory there was 18 months prior to being diagnosed, I play a bit of squash. And I have done for a long time. So I took a whack to the boob playing squash, and a couple of months later I noticed that there was a bit of a lump there, so I took myself off to the doctor. Actually, I had an mammogram done and it came back clear, so that was like September, October, and then in January that year I noticed the lump, so off to the doctor, and he sent me away from a mammogram and a ultrasound, and it came back as a 5 mil cyst. So that was all good. Life's going on, working, just enjoying life, getting ready for Luke's wedding. And then 12 months later, it started to get a bit sore. And I thought, it's got to be hormonal, because it wasn't sore all the time. It was just around that time of month, and, it did sore. And then we had Luke's wedding, and I just kept putting it off. For about 3 months, it started to ramp up. And then Easter came, and Good Friday, I remember, because that night I just could not sleep. It was that painful. And one of my very dearest friends is a midwife, and I saw her the next day and I said, hey, you know that lump I told you about? Jesus, it gave me curry last night. I could not sleep. It was that painful. And she said, can you get yourself to the doctor first thing Monday? Yeah, okay. So come Monday was my RDO. I'm in doing book work for the business, and she phoned me and she said, have you made that appointment yet? I said, no, I'll get to it this afternoon. I'm just doing the BAS at the moment. And she said, if you don't make it, I will. You need, I thought, okay, this could be a bit serious. So off I toddled into the doctor. He had a poke and said, oh, yes, definitely a lump there. Mark could feel a lump. I could feel a lump. And then he sent me away again for an ultrasound. So I'm going over to Bundaberg thinking, yeah, ultrasound, mammogram, it's a cyst. It's probably just growing in size and it's on a nerve sort of thing. I should have known something wasn't right when I was shopping and they phoned me to say, we need you to come back to have a needle biopsy. Okay, righto. Something funky with this cyst going on. So off I go back in, had the needle biopsy, and off I go. And then I get a phone call from the doctor's surgery, and they said, Dr. Ung would like to see you about your results. So, yeah, okay, Elaine, which is his wife and the receptionist. I said, I've got to have a tooth pulled out today, so is it really that important? Because, how many times you've been to the doctor and they just tell you it's good, it's just a cyst, And she said, I'd be cancelling that root canal, Letetia. And I said, okay, I'll see you in an hour. And I remember going in, sitting down, and he said, I don't have good news for you, Letetia. He said, it's breast cancer. And I've gone, oh, yeah, okay. All right, we'll just get this out. And he said he was reinforcing to me, it's not good news, Letetia, it's breast cancer. And I said, does that mean I've got to have chemotherapy? And he said, oh, most definitely. He is 88, I might add, this doctor. Yeah. And he said, oh, most definitely. And when he said that, I thought to myself, oh, my God, it's just got real, Letetia. So, yeah, anyway, I walked out. And he said, you need to get to the specialist, I'll refer you. And I remember walking outside, phoning Mark and telling him, and he got quite upset because, when you tell people you've got breast cancer or the word cancer, they tend to think that it is death row. And I said, it's all okay, don't worry about it. I've just got to, go and see the surgeon in Brisbane. We'll get through this. And then I phoned Mum, and when I phoned Mum, that's when I got a bit upset about it too. So then it was straight into see the surgeon in Brisbane on the Monday. He referred me to the oncologist the Thursday. The following Monday, I was back having chemo education. surgical consult Tuesday afternoon, surgery Wednesday for the porta cath, wheeled out of hospital at 5:30, back for first chemo treatment at 8:30 the Thursday the next day. So I had 6 months worth of chemo, had a month off, then surgery, I had a month off, then radiation, and 6 months of tablets. So, that was pretty tough going, doing the chemo. Never, ever been so sick in all my life. So, it pays to do your regular checks because it was stage 3. And if we hadn't done regular checks, another couple of months down the track and we could have a different story. So I went from working full-time to being pretty well housebound for 6 months. And that was probably the hardest to deal with because, like I said, I'm a very social butterfly and I feed off other people's energy. And when you just go week to week having chemo and all you can do is pretty well drag yourself from the house to the car, to the chemo chair, back to the car and back to the house for 6 months, that paid a big part of, mentally. And then losing your hair was another big mental struggle as well. Because I thought, well, I'm not going to let cancer, ruin my life. I'm going to be in control of it. And I went and got my hair cut short. And then when it was falling out in the shower, that was like, oh my God, this is really happening, isn't it? So, and then the other struggle I had too was when I did actually go to town and have a turban on, it was the people's looks were like, oh, we're so sorry. Yeah, you're going to, it's not good news for you. Like you couldn't get away from it once you lost your hair. It was in your face then. And
it's shining lights, isn't it? Oh, look at I've got cancer, and all you want to do is be normal, but you've got
and you just can't. You can't be normal when you're that crook. And then I got really crook where I had to spend a week in hospital and a night in ICU because my blood counts got very low. And I ended up almost having organ failure out of it too, another couple of hours, and it would have been another different story too. So sometimes you just got to look at the positive and think that, these are the cards that have been dealt. So you just got to, I learnt a lot of tools when Mark had his accident. It was minute by minute, hour by hour, then day by day, then you can work week by week, month by month. And that's just how I processed it, I suppose. We just take it, as it goes.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to ask you, what helped you through, but obviously going through, as you just said, with that experience with Mark, gave you some of those
life tools. Yeah, definitely. The other thing too was I had 2 very good friends, yourself and another Pauline mother, Sandy. And you both know that I was a social butterfly, and it was you guys that helped me up that Instagram, my, my breast cancer journey. And that was great for me because that was my social connection to the outside world. And I always thought if I'm leaving the house, I am going to go and look fabulous in that chemo chair. So I would make an effort to do a face, play around with turbans and, wear a nice shirt, And
you did. You look bloody fabulous. And I will put the links to your Instagram page so people can see that as well. It was, what's Letetia going to have this time? What gorgeous shirt will you have on? And it would have been, if it lifted us, I can only imagine what it would have done to lift your spirits as well, and to get that lovely interaction from other people to say, good on you, look at you. It was truly inspirational.
Yeah, it was really overwhelming how positive everyone was, and which helped get me through, those dark days. And I thought, well, if I'm going to share my story, I can't hide behind the turban or, hide within the house. So, yeah, so I just started to take selfies and just put a post up, and I tried to make sure I did a weekly post on chemo days, and just, yeah, I think it was probably also to help me look back. So we'll be coming up to 2 years in April since being diagnosed, and there's still ongoing issues, and, you know, I don't think life will ever be the same now, and I can fully understand how Mark probably felt when he came home and was trying to recover from his ordeal. So, yeah, you just do what you got to do.
And so would that be the advice that you would give to anyone else who might be going through a similar situation?
Yeah, look, I think the best advice that you could give someone that's going through something similar is just take it, you know, if you're at that stage of your treatment minute by minute and then hour by hour and week by week, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and they've come so far in the last 5 years. If I was diagnosed 5 years ago, I would have had to have a double mastectomy, you know, and back then they used to do surgery first. But now, because of the type of tumour I had, which was a triple negative tumour, apparently chemo first reduces the size, and then that's a less invasive operation. So I had a 4 centimetre tumour, and to me 4 centimetres I thought wasn't very big, but in tumour world, breast cancer world.
But you got an A+ on that one, did you?
Yes, yeah, and I got the top shelf tumour. So
of course you did, nothing but the best for you.
Yeah, I know. Can't win lotto, but we win the tumour. And, yeah, so the chemo had actually reduced it from 4 centimetres to 1 millimetre.
Wow.
So that made it all worthwhile. Like, you sit there and you think 6 months of doing what we had to do. And thank God for Mark and my dearest friends that rallied around. And if Mark couldn't get me to chemo, then, you know, we'd tag team with a couple of other great mates of mine, and they'd take me over. And I used to hate asking for help, always did. But when you're pretty crook, you know, you just got to leave your dignity at the door, and you just got to be too proud.
Because that's it. People will drop everything to help you, and that's the thing. They want to know how can they help. So that'll lead me on to the next question. So the advice that you gave for someone who's dealing with a huge life event like you were, but what advice would you give to family and friends who've got someone that they love going through something so massive and life-changing?
Just ask the question, is there anything we can do? And if they're up to accepting, they'll let you know. They will let you know. So don't feel bad that, you know, you've asked and they haven't answered your question. In time, they know who you're there for them, and, you know, if they really need you, they'll come and reach out then. So just don't be afraid to ask, is there anything we can do? Even if it's a load of washing or preparing a meal or, you know, sitting with them while they're going through chemo. But I pretty well slept through most of my chemo because they used to give me Phenergan to help with the side effects. And I remember snorting and waking myself up.
With a little bit of dribble, did you?
And they used to have to wake me up to say, chemo's done, love, you can go home now. And
fun part's over. Then you had to deal with the reality of what it was, what the aftermath was
like. So the first, like, once you had treatment, the first 3-4 days were the toughest with side effects. And then, you know, you started to feel good. And then you'd have to go to town to have bloods done. And then Wednesday, you know, started to feel, you know, half normal. And then it was Thursday. Off you go.
It must have been a long haul for you.
Yes, for 6 months.
Wow. That would have felt like an eternity when you were going through that.
And look, the other bit of advice is, like, when they say you're going to have 6 months worth of chemo and you think 6 months is such a long time, in the grand scheme of life itself, it is really just a blimp, 6 months. And how fast are the years going now? So,
I know. Month, you know, you already think of when by the time this episode comes out, it's going to be even further down the track, and how quickly 2023 is disappearing already. Yeah. So Tish, how's going through what you've just gone through the last couple of years changed how you view the future, or has it changed at all?
I think having a near-death experience, it makes you sit back and evaluate things in life. And everyone would be different, don't get me wrong. I had a 5-year plan where I was going to work my way up in my role. I was going to do some more external studies and then probably finish work on the highest I probably could in my career. I worked for local government looking after all the assets. And so that was my sort of 5-year plan. But after returning back to work, I just removing the stress out of one's life as much as possible and taking the pressure off oneself as well, and reevaluating what is really important to me. It could, what's important to me could be different to someone else. So to me, the thing I focus a lot on is, my boys and Mark. So for me now going forward, I'm just looking forward to become a grandmother and watching Adam and Lane find love and fall in love and have a wedding, and just want to be available for the kids if they need grandma there to look after the children or something, to have that freedom and to be able to, get out and see, travel more, or don't get bogged down with just like, well, this is what we need to do or want to do. Just set yourselves little goals like, we'll go away, let's get a caravan or that sort of thing, and travel a little bit more. So, yeah, having been diagnosed has made me sit back and realise, the future looks good.
Brilliant.
Really. I've got a clearer head and feel a lot comfortable with that. It sits well with me. Yeah. Just go to work and do my job to the best of my ability and give 110%, but try and reduce the stress and relax and enjoy life and what's going to come down the track.
Yeah, so that managing your stress is so important, isn't it? Whether for everybody, but particularly because you've been so unwell. What else do you do apart from, reducing the stresses in your life? What else are you doing to support your health and your wellness?
So after being, quite crook, doing chemo really does knock your fatigue levels around, and it is a real slap in the face where you've finished your treatment. So I haven't had that, yeehaw moment where you go, yep, we've done it all, because I'm on 3 monthly visits with the oncologist, and you've always got that monkey sitting on your back, that recurrence monkey. So you've got to try and I push him away as much as soon as those thoughts come into one's head, I change my narrative as soon as that comes into your head. So what I'm doing now is, I loved playing squash. I used to play 2 or 3 times a week, and I started playing again 12 months ago. Well, can I tell you, a slog and a half. Here I am. Off I go to play my first game of fixtures, thinking, you beauty, life's getting back to normal. Well, I think I near crawled off that court thinking, oh, what am I doing? So I just like to do little self-checks every 3 months and go, you know what, 3 months ago I was crawling off the court, and now, I'm skipping off the court sort of thing. So, just getting a bit more movement in one's life. Drinking, this year I've said, okay, last year was trying to get some normality back into one's life. And now that I think that we are getting that done, it's now, righto, what do I need to do to get back to my full potential? So it's like, okay, I need to get back to drinking my, 1.5 litres of water a day. And I've done a little bit of a health check at the beginning of the year, and it was like, right, I need to get the inside fixed and healthier. So I'm taking a green powder of a morning. Every morning I'm doing my fish oil because chemo really affected my skin and dryness. And so I take my tablets and my water and my green powder every morning. And I've just, said to myself, okay, every 3 months, let's just do a self-check and see how we're travelling. And also just writing, taking inspiration from yourself and having a focus word, and it's on the mirror in the bathroom. And so that's what I'm doing, just trying to get the inside healthier and a bit more movement this year.
Yeah. Well done to you. So you talked about what you're looking forward to in the next half of your life when you were talking about being seeing that the boys find their partners, become parents themselves, and you being grandma, and then adding a little bit of travel for you and Mark as well in there. So your future is looking very rosy, and you're doing all you can to support yourself as you becoming healthier and healthier, or not healthier, but stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward into when Letetia is 80 years old. What is 80-year-old Letetia going to say about current day Letetia?
Yeah, well, hand on heart for this one, Jo. I knew you were going to ask this question because I have been listening to your podcasts, which I find very relevant. It is a tough question, but I think 80-year-old Letetia would say to 51-year-old Letetia, everything will be right. You're going okay. Life's good. And I think she would pat me on the back and be quite proud of, what I have achieved in those couple of, bad situations in our lives and how I've dealt with them in our life. I think I'd get a fairly good pat on the back. And I think 80-year-old Letetia would be pretty proud of 51-year-old Letetia.
Damn right she would be. I can't wait. I can't wait to sit down with 80-year-old Letetia.
Well, we won't be sitting down. We'll be on our motorised scooters with our guitars in hand.
We'll be walking everywhere. I'm going to get you moving.
Tearing up the street.
We'll have the wheelie walkers instead. No, I think we'll be nice and upright, and we'll be able to walk into whatever we damn well want to in our 80s.
I think whatever comes our way, I think both Mark and I will be well prepared for it.
Of that, I have no doubt. And for you, you've been an absolute inspiration for me, and I'm sure people who listen to this, they're going to get a lot out of it. So thank you very much for being so vulnerable and being so honest in sharing Mark's journey and how you cope with that, and also what you've just gone through.
I just hope that if any listeners, male and female, go and check themselves tonight in the shower.
Yep.
It's not just women that come down with breast cancer either. So
that's exactly right.
Remind the men to check their fellas out too.
And on that, we shall leave. So thank you so much, Letetia. Appreciate your time today.
No, thank you, Jo. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening and sharing your time with me today. I'd love you to hit subscribe on Apple Podcast or your favourite podcast app to keep spreading these empowering messages. Please share this podcast with other incredible midlife women in your world. Join me again next week for another redefining midlife conversation. Thanks again for tuning in.